Here I am again with the Swiss Army knife of Macs, the mid-2007 iMac, which is now currently running 20 different Intel macOS installs, and 21 installs in total. So let's get to it. Anyway, guys, I'm Greg Hrutkay of Hrutkay Mods, and welcome to another episode where we're exploring my mid-2007 iMac. And is this truly still the universal Swiss Army knife of Macs? Kinda. We're going to get into that. But I'd like to talk to you about how I got this going and show you every single operating system that's on it, and talk a little bit about every operating system, which means this is going to be a very long video. And if you notice, there's my early 2008 MacBook Pro in front of it. Spec for spec, it's the same system, same CPU, same RAM, just a different GPU. And we're going to boot test between these two. This has a hard drive in it, and this has an SSD in it. And this is a cheap Chinese SSD with no NAND or anything. It's not exactly fast, but it's still, if this thing had it, it would benefit from it a lot. We'll be doing that later in the video. But right now, here is my mid-2007 iMac, which now is running every single Intel macOS install ever made, including Sequoia, as we can see right here. Although it doesn't run super great, and you'll see that towards the end of the video. There's still some issues with Sequoia, but it does work. And we're going to now explore everything. So before we do that, we're going to transfer over to this, and I'm going to talk to you about how you have to do it to set it up properly. And then we'll take it from there. So let's go. All right, so while this is booting into my main OS, which is Ventura, let's talk about why this isn't exactly the universal Swiss Army knife it used to be. And that is mainly because of Big Sur and Monterey. There was an update that broke metal support for, non-metal support. The GPU drivers were all messed up, and it only happens to non-metal ATI video cards. So, yeah, even though Big Sur is probably the best, newest OS you should run on this thing, because of many different reasons, which we'll go into when we talk about Big Sur, it doesn't run right, and you'll see that when we're talking about Big Sur. The only way to have a universal just work system is to get a 24-inch iMac, the mid-2007 model, and upgrade it to an early 2008 NVIDIA GPU. And that should, in theory, fix everything. I believe the card is compatible with Tiger. Now, why are we not talking about the early 2008s as usual when we're talking about being the universal everything, and it's faster and it's just a better system? Well, even though the mid-2008s will fully boot Tiger, which I've booted my mid-2008 on, or early 2008 onto Tiger, it doesn't quite work. The drivers just aren't all there. They changed just enough in the system where there's no sound, there's a bunch of other little issues here and there, it just doesn't work. And that's why this is still the universal with a CPU upgrade. You can run any OS, and it will just run it. It may not be the fastest with a hard drive, which you'll see, but it just does it. But because of the ATI graphics in it, Big Sur and Monterey have so many glitches, it's not really usable anymore. So you really need an NVIDIA GPU. And, well, yeah, you can't stick an NVIDIA GPU into a 20-inch. It used too much power. It needed extra power and a better heat sink, and it was huge compared to the regular ATI HD 2600 and 2400s. And yeah, this isn't exactly the Swiss Army anymore, and it's still booting. It's not fast with this hard drive. But once it's booted, it works pretty quick, and you'll see that. But yeah, it's still booting. So yeah, that's why this isn't the universal Swiss Army anymore. And really, there isn't one unless you build it yourself, which you could do with a 24-inch with the right GPU and the right CPU. It should, in theory, work fine. And then you'd have a universal that runs everything properly. This will still boot those two operating systems. They did later fix the patches, and it works on the later OSs like Ventura. That's why we're running Ventura here. But it doesn't work on those two. They never fixed the patches. They were implemented differently. So, yeah, that's a bit of an issue. And it's finally booted up, so we can start talking about it. So let's do it. All right, so let's talk about how we had to set up this drive. Setting up the drive is actually quite difficult if you're using just one hard drive. And I had to use the main hard drive and not like the optical drive bay or anything to make this all work, because anything after Big Sur can't see the optical drive bay because it's based off of IDE. So yeah, the optical drive bay in Monterey and later just does not work. You can't see the optical drive bay. It doesn't do anything. If you want to use optical media, you have to have an external drive. And otherwise, I'd be running another hard drive in that bay right now, and this would have made this a lot easier. But to make this work, even though EFI and UEFI, EFI is technically the early version of UEFI, EFI was designed so you could have more partitions on a drive, and you could see higher than 2 terabytes. And this drive is a 2 terabyte drive. You should be able to run up to, I think it's 128 partitions, but macOS will only allow you to put 16 partitions on a hard drive, no matter what. You could run more on it. It will see them, but you can't format them to do it. And if you're going to do this all with just macOS stuff, you're limited to 16 partitions, which would be a problem if they hadn't changed how APFS works. When APFS was introduced, after the Apple partition maps and the journaling and all that stuff, APFS, it took a long time to get used to it and figure it out on my own to make it work properly. But basically what I did is I journaled Tiger all the way through High Sierra, because High Sierra will still boot on journaled partitions. And then after that, I made 3 more partitions, and they were APFS, and you could have different volumes and stuff on them. And that's how I got around the 16 partition limit. I've got 16 partitions journaled, or I think that's right. It gets confusing. As you can see, there's a lot of drives, okay? That's journaled, that's journaled, that's journaled, that's journaled, that's journaled, that's journaled, 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 and not journaled. But anyway, you get the idea. The ones that are not journaled are APFS. And because you can have containers, that makes it easier to do this. So what you have to do is first format it in an OS that will allow you to make all these partitions properly. I would recommend High Sierra just because it supports APFS. And what I did is I made all my partitions I needed that were needed to be journaled first. Once you make these partitions, they are not partitionable again in older OSs, period. So High Sierra allowed me to make those partitions. Then the APFS partitions I just left until Monterey, or Mojave. Too many M's. But anyway, with Mojave, I partitioned out the APFS drives. And actually, I might have partitioned them out with Catalina. I can't remember. But we explained about this back on the last time we did all these OSs on this system. back in 2022. APFS has changed through the years. It was introduced in the betas of the late beta stages of Sierra. You have to hack it to make it work with Sierra, but Sierra will read them once you type in some commands to make them work. Well, APFS changed. High Sierra, all the way through kind of Catalina, were APFS 1. That's why I call it. It used the volumes differently. After Catalina, all of them have two different mirrored drives. It's really confusing, and the older OSs don't read those drives properly. You can see the data drive, but you can't see the other drive. So you have to have separate partitions, and it gets really confusing. And what I did is Mojave and Catalina both need APFS. Catalina is a weird hybrid APFS. It was like the stopgap between the first version and the second version. It can see the second version's drives, but it can't make them. Where Mojave can't see the second version's drives. It gets really confusing and very complicated. So I made all the original journal drives, installed the OSs on them. Then when I got to Mojave, I had to split the drives. And I've got Catalina and Mojave on one separate APFS volume because they're the most similar. And then my main OS, which is my Ventura install, was the second APFS drive. And then all the rest of the OSs are on a big chunk of APFS from Big Sur all the way through Sequoia. So that's how I set it up. And what do we have on here? We have every single Mac OS made for Intel. And we're going to boot into every single one of them. And it could get a little difficult and challenging, but I've finally figured out all the workarounds and stuff to make everything boot properly. So we're going to film booting in each one of them and talk about each OS, which means this video is going to be a very long time, and you might want to skip to chapters if you want to see a specific OS, because this is going to be a long video. So, yeah, enough ranting. Let's get on to actually looking at all the OSs. So let's go. So before we boot this thing up into OpenCore Legacy Patcher, let's talk real quick about this aluminum keyboard. I figured out a workaround for needing a USB hub, because this is a USB 2 keyboard. It actually has a built-in USB 2 hub in it, and it is a USB 2 device. And this is actually the original keyboard that came with this system. And I've been using those plastic keyboards like this one here, and I love these keyboards a lot more. I can't stand chiclet keyboards, but they are not USB 2 where this is. And this allowed me to install the later OSs that require the USB 2 USB controllers to work. Just natively, it just worked. You could type and set up everything, and you didn't have to have a hub, which was quite handy. But yeah, keyboard miracle worker there. It saved a lot of time hassling around with hubs and stuff that I couldn't find that are somewhere in this house. So yeah, but anyway, we're going to boot this up in OpenCore Legacy Patcher real quick and show you the OSs. So we're going to file through all the OSs, and I'm going to talk to you what they are. All right, we've got Tiger Server, Leopard Server, Snow Leopard Server, Lion, Mountain Lion, Mavericks, Yosemite, El Capitan, Sierra, High Sierra, Catalina, Mojave, Ventura, that's my main OS. It starts getting confused around this area. Sonoma, Big Sur, Monterey, Ventura again, that's the regular basic install, and Sequoia. Yeah, I did say Catalina. Yeah, it starts getting switched and flip-flopped in this area here. As you can tell, it's not in order, but it's installed on the drive in order, so yeah. But we're not going to use OpenCore Legacy Patcher to boot these OSs, even though you can. All the way up to Mountain Lion, it's going to be fine. After Mavericks, Mavericks starts having little issues here and there booting with this boot manager. Because OpenCore Legacy Patcher is emulating the device, and the newer OSs don't support the Bluetooth that's built into this, and it's starting with around Mavericks, the Bluetooth gets shut off if you boot through this boot menu. So we're going to boot all the way up to Mojave, or we'll boot up to Catalina with the regular boot menu and take it from there. The thing is, when you're in this menu, sometimes it blacks out the regular boot menu and you can't read the text. So I'm still going to have to boot this into a supported system and then shut it off and then start it back up and pray the boot menu comes back gray instead of black. So I'll be right back. All right, I had to restart the computer multiple times and swap out the aluminum keyboard for a old Apple keyboard because, well, for some reason it keeps canceling out the option button. Yeah, so I had to unplug that keyboard. And now we're in the stock boot menu, and we're going to go into Tiger first. And welcome to the one and only operating system that does not work properly on an early 2008. I think Server also doesn't work properly on them, but they're the same base code, more or less, in ways anyway. Server is more of a Leopard code. It's confusing, but we're in Tiger here. As we can see, we're running Tiger. Tiger is that bastard child that it really was not useful on an Intel Mac, in my opinion. The consumer version, anyway. The server version, on the other hand, well, we'll get to that in a second. But we are running Tiger here. As we can see, if we go to more info, it is this system. So it's running Tiger. It runs it really fast. It works really well. It's just, it's just not useful in today's world. It really wasn't even when it was new. It was great for PowerPC applications, but couldn't run OS 9 classic applications. I mean, it's the things that made Tiger great on PowerPC just did not work right in Intel. So yeah, it's Tiger. It's not that great of an OS. But Tiger Server, on the other hand, that is a useful OS. Welcome to Tiger Server. This was the first really useful OS on an Intel Mac, in my opinion. And it is very different. It is a system that, let's see if I can even figure this out here. It is a system that works quite well for what it needs to be done. It's still a very useful OS even today because it can still serve a modern day Mac if you need to serve something. It also had features in it that nothing else really did. This was the last OS that allowed you to do stuff like, let's see here, sharing. No. Admin. No. It's here somewhere. General. No. Preferences. Here it is. This is where you could access a lot of different management OS software stuff that the later versions of Server never did have. For instance, you could actually manage OS 9 Classic on a PowerPC Tiger install, or even older. This should serve out for that too. And you could still net install OS 9 even on an Intel Mac with this OS is actually a lot more useful than you'd believe. It just works quite well. I keep clicking the wrong stuff. But it had a lot of different features. And this was the underlying code, basically, in my opinion. I would say this literally is the underlying code that you needed for Leopard, where Leopard is the very first OS that was actually pretty useful on an Intel Mac and was the first modern OS, aka post-Time Machine. It introduced Time Machines. Let's do that. And welcome to Leopard. This was the first useful Intel OS, even though today it's not really useful. If you were going to use an old retro OS that had Rosetta support, I would not recommend Leopard. This is a great OS on PowerPC, even today still, but on an Intel Mac it's just dated. Snow Leopard is where you want to be. We'll talk about Snow Leopard when you get there. But this is still a very useful OS in certain ways. There's no supported browsers out there for it anymore, so that becomes a problem. It's more useful than Tiger, but it's still not that great of an OS. But as we can see here, this is running on the same system, and it works. So let's get into an even more useful version of Leopard. Say hello to the last universal OS that Apple ever released here, Leopard Server. This OS I still use a lot, and even though you can't really browse with it anymore, it works quite well. This is the OS I still use on my main server, which is an Xserve G4, which allows me to back everything up. I use this OS a lot. And as we can see here, it's running. It's doing everything it needs to do, and it just works. It's a pretty decent OS, but it was tidied up quite well in Snow Leopard, and I just shut the machine down. Yeah. And welcome to arguably the best OS that ever graced a Mac, Snow Leopard. And this was the last OS that supported the original version of Rosetta, so you could run PowerPC applications. This OS was completely rewritten from the ground up. It's extremely blazing fast on this hardware, and it is the OS I recommend going to if you want a retro OS to play around with and still have some modern day things. They still make browsers that support Snow Leopard, believe it or not. At least they've not been updated recently, but they're still modern enough that allow you to still use modern day web if you need and want to use it. And this OS is just a very fast, fluid system that it's an amazing OS, but even got better. So let's show you that. And welcome to Snow Leopard Server, the very last server OS that Apple ever made. Of course, they had the assistant server applications up until one of the most recent OSs. I think it was Big Sur. I can't remember right offhand. But those applications suck. This was the last truly server-based OS. It was the last separately sold OS that was just for server. And this is a system that I have not really yet played with a whole lot, but it does what it needs to do. It works quite well. It's even more streamlined and quicker than Leopard Server, and it works quite well. I'll be putting this on my 2009 Xserve whenever I finally transfer from my G4 to that, and it just works quite well. As we can see here, it's running, and it just does what it needs to do, which is awesome. Now, here's when we go to the painful OS. And welcome to the Windows Vista of macOS. macOS 10 Lion. This OS is bad. This is an awful OS. It was not streamlined well. They cut out a lot of features that Snow Leopard had that people loved. For instance, Rosetta. And you'd think cutting out the bulk like Rosetta and stuff would speed the system up. No, it was actually such an awful operating system that it turned every Mac into a slow crawl, and was sadly the last 32-bit EFI OS, which means a lot of Macs got stuck on it. Even though you could run Mountain Lion on them, and they ran quite well, you had to hack them on. And Lion, just in general, is just an awful OS. Not a fan of it. It is a nasty OS, but they fixed all of its foibles and mistakes with Mountain Lion. And Mountain Lion was actually a very nice OS. Let's go to it. And welcome to Mountain Lion. This is kind of like the Windows 7 of the macOS world. Everyone really loved this OS, even though there are other OSs that people love more. This is not in equivalency. It's not Windows 7, but it's kind of like that going from Vista to 7. It was a big leap. And this is what Apple should have released in the first place when they released Lion, because it was streamlined, it actually worked properly, and it was quick. And yeah, there's still some browsers and stuff. Lion and Mountain Lion, all the way up to about Sierra or High Sierra. There's not many more modern browsers and stuff, but they're still useful. You can still find browsers that work with them. The newer the OS, the better chance you'll have with a functional browser, but I mean, it works. And this is Mountain Lion. Mountain Lion is it's a very good OS. It's definitely not my favorite, but compared to Lion, this is leaps and bounds better in every way, shape, and form. And welcome to Colin Mister's favorite OS. Yes, DOSDude 1 uses this OS as his daily driver, and he also still codes all his coding off of Mavericks every chance he gets, which is quite impressive watching him do it, considering how old Mavericks is getting. Mavericks' last true update was in 2016, and he's still using it every day. This was the last skeuomorphic OS that Apple ever released, and the first free OS that Apple ever released. As long as you had Apple hardware, the OS was free. And this system, this OS was a very streamlined, very beautiful OS, and a perfect stopgap between, any later ones that had the flat UI and all that stuff. It's quick, responsive, and it is a very pretty OS. It's the last true old school feeling, but still kind of modern feeling OS. It's hard to explain, but it was a very fun, strong OS. And it was actually the first OS I think I ever downloaded on a VM. It's the first OS I had on my App Store history. So it's got some meaning to me, but it was before I really started using a Mac, so I never really got to use it. But still, it's a neat OS. And meet the first Mac OS I ever daily drove on my first modern day Mac, my early 2009 MacBook. And that is Yosemite. Yosemite was the first flat OS. It is not very streamlined. It's kind of slow compared to El Capitan. It was a weird transitional. Everything is flat on it except for the beach ball of death, the loading pointer. It is actually still in 3D, which they fixed in El Capitan. But other than that, this OS, I have some good, fond memories of starting off playing around with Macs. But I didn't get to use it super long before El Capitan came out and before the channel started back up. It's still a useful OS. Still works quite well on some older systems, but it's still... It's just it doesn't have the support that El Capitan does, because El Capitan was another OS that a lot of Macs died on. This was one of them. And welcome to El Capitan, the very last officially supported OS for this system, and technically the very last supported OS for this system, period, with the factory hardware. Without the CPU upgrade, you can't go past El Capitan. But, of course, this one's been upgraded, so we don't have to worry about that. The El Capitan was an incredible OS. It's still very useful today for most part. Browsers haven't been updated for quite some time, which is getting to be a bit of an issue if you're running El Capitan, but it's still a decent OS. It's the last OS that supported 32-bit EFI Macs with patches and stuff, because it's the last Mac that supported CPUs that did not support SSE 4.1. Any OS after that needed SSE 4.1, which killed this Mac and a lot of other ones. But there was a lot of Macs that had that support, and they just dropped the support for the OS, even though the CPU still supported it, and all the hardware was the same. In fact, for Sierra and High Sierra, they use basically the same drivers. They just upped the CPU requirement, and that's really the only real difference on requirements there. El Capitan, I enjoy. It's got a lot of memories. I mean, this is the OS that I use to get my channel back going on my 1,1 Mac Pro, showing you how to get it to work on it. And yeah, it still works quite well on that Mac Pro that's sitting over there. So, yeah. Anyway, let's start getting into the OSs that this did not support, nor would run without a CPU upgrade. And welcome to the bastard child of Apple. This is the OS that Apple does not want you to remember. And one of the main reasons is because Sierra, every officially supported Mac that supported Sierra supported High Sierra, and Apple expected you to upgrade to High Sierra. And Sierra is basically like the beta version of High Sierra. There really wasn't anything that changed between the two, except High Sierra supported APFS natively, and, well, that's really the only real difference. Sierra was one of the first OSs that Apple basically hid. It just suddenly you could not download it anymore. It's hard to get a hold of. And it's harder to get a hold of than a lot of other OSs. And I think it's mainly because Apple decided they'd rather support High Sierra, and basically anything that High Sierra could do, Sierra could do, and vice versa. So what was the point in having Sierra? I didn't use Sierra very much. I found it pretty quick and stable when I did use it. On my MacBook, which at that time did not support Sierra, but thankfully the DOS Dude 1 patcher fixed that. And Sierra worked quite well, but yeah, I didn't use it very long. Sierra was the first OS that supported Siri. And yeah, Siri probably still works. Hi, Siri.
Hi there.
Yeah, still works. I mean, it's cool. It works. And this was the first OS that this couldn't run natively. And yeah, well, it runs it. Everything works. It's a little slow. High Sierra is actually faster. They fixed a lot of the codes and stuff between the transition between El Capitan and High Sierra. Sierra is kind of that weird stopgap. There's reasons why Apple stopped supporting it. There's reason why Colin even stopped releasing patches for it. I'm actually running some High Sierra patches on this to make the Wi-Fi work because Colin stopped updating the patcher because, like Apple, he didn't see the point in supporting regular Sierra. And I don't blame him because, yeah. But yes, the High Sierra patches actually work on Sierra also, which allows you to run the Wi-Fi and all that stuff. This is the original native Wi-Fi, and it works thanks to the High Sierra patches. So let's get to High Sierra. And welcome to High Sierra, the very last OS to support non-metal GPUs natively. And basically all the hardware in this system, other than the Wi-Fi, which of course still needed patched, all the hardware in this system just natively supported this OS after the CPU upgrade. This is the last truly, everything just works properly OS. And you'll get errors like incompatible disk because it's seeing the APFS2 drives that are on the hard drive, and it can't read those. But it can see regular APFS, and this is the last OS that could boot off an HFS Plus drive. It just works. Everything works quite well on High Sierra, and it's a lot quicker than Sierra. I understand why Apple swept Sierra under the rug, but it's still, you know, it's nice to have Sierra on here. It's just it's not useful compared to High Sierra, which just recently lost browser support. This is running, it can run up to, I think, 115 on the ESR of Firefox. Firefox, they dropped support for it last year. Sometime in September, they're killing off full support for ESR on this OS. And after that, you don't have a modern day browser anymore on this. And that's the same boat with Mojave. But yeah, High Sierra works quite well. It's very fast. It's literally the last OS that supported non-metal GPUs like what this has in it. And it just works. It works quite well. Not much else to say about it. It's still modern enough that you could still use it today if you really wanted to. And I'm sure there's still going to be some other browsers out there that support it in the future. But yeah, it's starting to die off also. And welcome to the first OS that only supported metal GPUs, but actually still supported non-metals quite well with the patches. And this was also the last OS that supported 32-bit applications. And this would be Mojave. And Mojave is just a solid OS. This is one of my favorites of all time. It is a very solid, quick OS, even on older hardware. It might take a little time to boot up, but it's a very solid, quick OS. The only drawback is the first one that required APFS if you wanted to update it, and et cetera, et cetera. And that can cause problems with hard drives because APFS is really designed for flash, an SSD, flash memory, all that stuff. Flash. APFS works perfectly on flash. On hard drives, on the other hand, it does not work super great. It's a bit slow and sluggish. But when it comes to running on here, it's kind of quick and kind of not at times. Like every time you open up storage, it freezes right there. There we go. But I mean, it's quick enough where this is still a very useful OS, but this also falls in the same category as High Sierra with modern day web browsers losing support in the next month. That's a bit of an issue, and I hit the wrong button there. We don't want a software update. See, it's the same system, and it works quite well. And this was my main OS on this system, but I wanted a newer OS that still supported a newer browser, so we had to finally dump it. But I love Mojave, and I still run Mojave on a few of my systems, so I can still use legacy applications. So let's do the last DOS-Dude patched OS, Catalina. And welcome to the very first 64-bit application-only macOS, Catalina. Catalina is, I have a love-hate relationship with. This was the first and only OS where the default icons were rounded, and I hated them. So did everyone else, and Apple thankfully fixed that in Big Sur. This was also the last OS 10 ever made. This was 10.15. And this is the OS I recommend if you have one of these systems and you want a modern day OS that still has supported browsers. Right now, Firefox is still being updated on this, and I probably, hopefully, will be at least through next month before it goes to ESR. And it still have at least another year updates on that. It's a very solid OS. This was the last OS that was pretty functional on a hard drive. It worked quite well with non-metal GPUs with the right patches and stuff. The DOS-Dude 1 patches work great on this, and this is the most polished patch OS that Colin ever did. This is a very good OS, very fast, very... it's just... I don't like the styling of it, and I enjoyed having 32-bit app support. So I personally don't like it, but it's a perfect OS for this system. This is the last true OS that runs perfectly on this. This is the last OS that everything's just stable. GPU works, everything once it's patched. The optical drive works, all that stuff works. It's a good OS. Especially on this system, and I enjoy this OS. I don't like the stylizing of it, like the stupid icons. I still hate that. But the OS itself is a very fast, very reliable OS. It just sucks it didn't support 32-bit apps. And otherwise, it's a good OS. It's a good transitional OS to jump between the old school OSs and the modern day OSs, the true modern day OSs, when Apple Silicon support really started, which was with Big Sur. So let's get on to Big Sur, and let's jump into the actual OCLP boot menus now, where we will lose Bluetooth support, but oh well. It's a stability thing, so let's get to it. Okay, so we're about to boot into Big Sur, and this is the first modern-day OS that there's issues with it, and we're going to talk about it. So let's boot into it. You know, before we boot into Big Sur, maybe we should actually do a boot speed test between this system and that system, the MacBook Pro. It might have been a better idea. Let's do that. Okay, so before we boot this up, the reason why I'm running Big Sur as my main OS on this one is because it's the last OS that supported IDE drives, and my optical drive is actually a hard drive, and I like to be able to still access the files to it, which is also the reason why I'd recommend running Big Sur as the latest OS on this if it wasn't for the thing we're going to show you. But let's do a boot test. This is running a non-NAND SSD. It's a cheap Chinese hard drive SSD that will probably fail very soon. But it still runs, and it will show you that SSD does make a big difference. They're both the same specs, CPU and RAM wise. So let's boot them up. I'll hit enter at the same time for both of them. See which one boots up faster. It's kind of hard to put it in the frame. And also remember, this is just running a clean install other than having a web browser on it. This is a full install of Big Sur with a bunch of OS's programs and stuff running in the background. It is still kind of slow, but once you boot it up, yeah, it's a big difference. It's still loading in the bar up here. It's basically loaded up. The only thing it's got to finish doing is loading up the iStat menus. But it's basically booted up. It's booted. And this thing is still on a black screen, cranking away trying to boot up. Because Big Sur was one of the first OSs that really needed an SSD, like hardcore. And yeah, it's still booting. Yeah. Yeah. And this one's fully booted now. And this one just got to the menu. Yeah. Yeah. It's still loading. And we are loaded now. So yeah, this booted up about a minute faster. And yeah, it's quicker. It's going to be more responsive with an SSD. But once the OS is loaded up on this thing, it's fairly quick. The problem is with Big Sur, let's talk about that. Midway through the updates on Big Sur, one of them broke the non-metal ATI graphics patches, and they never fixed them. So even though it looks like it's working fine right now, as we can see here, it looks like it's running fine. And right now it really is. But the second you get to a program that has an overflow buffer or something on the GPU, like for instance Firefox, you know, the web browser that you might want to use on this, if it loads it, you start running into issues. And this is the issues that I was running into kinda back in 2022. I didn't know there was actually a problem with drivers at the time. So, there we go. As we can see, there's graphical glitches like crazy. And it will continue to do that. Yeah. It makes the OS kind of useless, because anytime you need to actually use a program that requires a little graphical acceleration, it doesn't work. And that's when you would have to upgrade to an NVIDIA GPU, which isn't really what I'd call upgrading. Plus, it ran a lot hotter, and they had a tendency to fail. But I mean, yeah, it's running Big Sur. It works. It just doesn't work well. Anytime acceleration really needs to get going, it starts choking. As you saw there, it starts freaking out, and it does the same thing on Monterey. So let's get to Monterey. And welcome to Monterey. Monterey actually runs a little quicker on this system than Big Sur does, but it's still a little sluggish. Once it boots up, it runs fine. This is, I haven't updated it to the most recent, which is 7.6, I think. The most recent updates came out shortly after I finished installing all the OSs on this thing. I never got around to finish updating it. But this does have the same problem as Big Sur. If you open up Firefox, for instance, it eventually opens it. Like I said, it could use an SSD. Any day now. Yeah, it's not freaking out right now, but it will. Give it time. If anything, Monterey is slightly more stable. And Monterey, this is, they're going to drop support for it with security updates in the next month or so. But right now, it's the oldest currently supported OS that runs on this thing. So yeah, it's Monterey. It works. It just doesn't work properly because of the graphical driver issue. It's not freaking out right now, but it will. So yeah, it runs. It's Monterey. But yeah, let's skip over to my most favorite modern day OS, which I'm still using on most of my systems because it's really good OS. So yeah, let's do it. And welcome to my favorite modern day OS that I'm still using, and it is still currently supported and will be supported for at least another year with security updates, Ventura. Ventura is such a clean, nice OS, and this is the newest OS that I would recommend going to on this system for one main reason, which we're about to talk about. And that is because when Sonoma was introduced, it introduced new graphics acceleration requirements that makes the OS really slow and sluggish. Where Ventura doesn't have that. They changed the way login worked and how the desktops worked and a bunch of other things that, even though under the hood Sonoma looks quite close to Ventura, it performs at about a fourth the speed of Ventura on this system. Ventura is a very quick, snappy OS. This OS was the first OS that they fixed the graphical issue with ATI drivers with OCLP. It still works flawlessly. It's a very clean, fast OS. Once it's booted up, it takes a long time to boot up on a hard drive. And until you get the stuff loaded into RAM, things are still slow, but they're still a lot quicker than Sonoma. By a long shot, Sonoma is painfully slow on this system, and I'm not going to bore you to tears watching it boot up. But just to let you know, it does take, it takes about 5 minutes or so to boot up. It's slow. Where Ventura is actually a very useful OS that actually still works properly on here. And as you can see, it's pretty snappy once it's booted up. It took about 3 minutes or so to boot up. But once it booted up, it's fast, it's responsive, and it just works. And I really love this OS. This is probably my favorite OS Apple has made in the last 10 years. It's a very good OS. And yes, most of my systems still run it because it's that good. So, yeah. Well, it's still loading up Sonoma. When you watch Sonoma boot up, you'll notice it boots up totally different than Ventura does. Ventura, it just goes straight to the desktop. It just loads. But with Sonoma, it's got to do that weird 3D transition into the desktop, and it slows everything down to a painful crawl and stuff. And it is still booting up, and wow. It's not fast. Now, with an SSD, it might be manageable, but the graphical acceleration thing, I have not really tested it on many other devices. It seems to work fine on NVIDIA GPUs that are non-metal, but the ATI ones, the acceleration just, it blows. And I don't know if that's some kind of driver issue or just incompatibilities in the hardware or what. It's still loading up. And yeah, I'm about to lose my mind just watching it boot. But yeah, this is the beginning of yeah, when the OSs just really don't work right. This OS works 100% totally fine once it's booted up, but getting it to boot up is one thing, and it also is slow. Even after it's loaded up, it's still pretty darn slow. It's a lot quicker once it's loaded up. As we can see, it's still loading. So there we go. It's still chugging away there. Oh boy. Yeah, Sonoma does not work well on this. Even with all the proper patches, it's just not happy with it. Any day now. There we go. We are running Sonoma, and it is working as well as you can get Sonoma to work. Yeah, it's, as we can see, once it's loaded up, it's not super slow, but it's still, yeah. Now, there is one more OS I want to talk about, and that would be Sequoia, the latest OS, which is still in beta. In fact, I'm running a much older beta on this, I think, right now, because I haven't updated it since I installed it. To get Sequoia to work, you have to run the nightly build of OpenCore Legacy Patcher. And I am running 1.6.0, which as of the time of filming this is still not available as an official release because it is literally just designed right now to work to install Sequoia, but it will not patch Sequoia. So to make Sequoia work, first off, you have no Wi-Fi, no anything that requires drivers. It just runs, and it doesn't run well because it's got no acceleration or anything. But without 1.6 nightly, we wouldn't be running it anyway. Because you can run it with 1.5, but the boot menu and all that stuff will not identify it properly. And I wanted it to do that. So let's get back into the boot menu, and we'll show you how it looks on there. And as we can see here, we do have Sequoia. It shows up properly on the menu. And yeah, we're going to boot into it. Now, when we boot into it, it's going to take forever to boot up. We're not filming that because it just takes forever. But without this keyboard right here, I would not be able to use Sequoia right now. So yeah, because there's no USB drivers or anything on it. That keyboard is the only thing allowing me to actually use Sequoia. So yeah, cool. Let's get into Sequoia. And welcome to the 20th different operating system this system can run. Currently, right now, it's not running it well because, well, there's no patches on it. It's doing animations at 1 frame per minute. It's going to shrink eventually. Come on, you can do it. There we go. And it's still actually loading in. It's a little slow. There's so many things about Sequoia and having acceleration things and, you know, not having these drivers on here. You'll probably eventually see OpenCore pop up and say it needs patched. It won't patch it, but it will detect that it needs patched. Super useful. Yeah. But anyway, let it load up here. There we go. We are running Sequoia. I don't know which version this one is. It's just one of the betas. Well, don't know which one it is. One of the betas, but it is running it. Very, very painfully slow. Now, when you don't have acceleration, it's even worse than if you, if you had it on Sequoia, when you have it on Sequoia, it runs well once, Sonoma, it runs well once it's loaded up. Not having any acceleration is painful on anything on this system. Yeah, it's not great. As we can see, it definitely does not have the drivers working on it. But it is running it, and it runs Sequoia. It is working. I don't know if that's really anything to brag about right now, because you really can't do much with it right now. It's a proof of concept of anything, because, things just don't work. Like, here's iPhone mirroring, which I guarantee you wouldn't work even... I don't even know what it's going to do, because I've never opened it before. But that is a new feature on Sequoia. iCloud signed out. Well, there's no internet, so because there's no Wi-Fi driver and it's not plugged in. So either way, it probably wouldn't work anyway. Yeah, but hey, don't know how you get out of it either. Oh, it's quit. Yeah, super, super useful. And even the wallpaper that's running on it right now, with no acceleration, dynamic wallpapers don't work. This is not a dynamic wallpaper. This is one I download offline, because otherwise I wouldn't have wallpaper. It'd just be a bright yellow screen. Yeah. It's Sequoia. It's running on here. That's about all you can say about it. It is running, though. 20 different OSs on one system. And 21 installs on here. You saw my main OS install earlier. You've seen 21 different operating systems. Well, 20 plus one double work on this thing, and it just works for most of them. Other than the few little ones that don't work, like Big Sur and Monterey, but they at least boot and function until you try something super graphical. And maybe one day they'll fix that, but I'm having my doubts. So I may be building a 24-inch iMac. There's the patcher right there. It won't run. I can guarantee you it will not run. But anyway, yeah, it's running. It's going to try to patch it. It won't patch it. Yeah, it's going to stop about right there. But anyway, yeah, it's running. That's really messing me up now. It's running 20 different OSs. Here it goes. It's where it says it's not going to work. It didn't work. But anyway, it is running 20 different OSs. It's running from Tiger all the way to Sequoia, and it's just doing it. So let's wrap up the video, and yeah, it's going to be an interesting wrap up. So let's do it. So yeah, 21 different installs of 20 different OSs. Yes, we got them all running on this. And, I kind of want to build a 24-inch with a upgraded GPU just to see if it would fix all the small little problems this one has. Plus, I don't have any 24 inches. So that could be an interesting one. Find a mid-2007, get another T9500 CPU, and get the, I think it's the A800GS card for it from an early 2008. Slap it in there and see if it all works. Because in theory it should, because Tiger was available on the mid-2007 MacBook Pro, and it had the same GPU more or less. It's an 8600, but same graphics drivers. It should in theory work fine. So I kind of want to try that, but yeah, 20 different OSs, 21 different installs on this system, and all of them work fine except Big Sur, Monterey, and Sequoia right now. But other than that, they work great. This system's still a very useful system today for web browsing and doing light tasks, maybe a little photo editing, not big photos, but something like that. Music production, it could still do that pretty well. It's incredible how useful this system is still. And being able to run an OS that was designed and released in 2005 and running an OS that was designed and released in 2023, and also the beta of the 24 OS on it, it's running them all. It's just, it does it. It works. And I never thought about doing the server versions before, which is kind of funny because the first 6 OSs on this thing are 10.4, 10.4, 10.5, 10.5, 10.6, 10.6. But the server versions for the second one, you know what I'm talking about. So the 7th operating system on this is literally the 7th operating system, 10.7 Lion. It's kind of cool and funny at the same time. It is running 20 different OSs on it and 21 installs on it. We're in my main OS right now, and if you notice this right here, that is about this hack, which is a pretty neat little program that brings back some of the functionality of the old system info screen. Pretty neat little hack, little application to allow you to see the old style screen alongside the new one. And yeah, it's still an amazing system. I do wish that Big Sur and Monterey actually worked properly. And I could still call this the Swiss Army knife Max, but unless they fix that, which I'm getting a feeling they probably won't, it still runs them, it just doesn't run them correctly, which is unfortunate. But like I said, I kind of want to build a 24-inch and see what happens. That could be a future video if I can get my hands on a mid-2007 and the proper GPU and stuff. Could be fun. And but yeah, that's the last video I'm doing on this system for quite some time. Even when Sequoia comes out officially, I'll just update Sequoia that's on it. And we may visit this again in a few years, unless something really big major happens or I come up with some neat idea for this thing. We've covered a lot on it, and Sequoia is probably going to be the last OS this can run, macOS wise. And if we want to run Windows on it, this system is one of those systems that only support MBR partitioning, which means we'll have to take the optical drive out and put another drive in here so we can run Windows 2. But, Boot Camp would still be useful on this, running Windows 10 at least. Windows 11, the CPU instruction sets just aren't there anymore for Windows 11. It's not, you'll be able to run an older version, but the newer versions just won't boot on a Core 2, sadly, which kind of sucks. Because when you think about it, it means in some ways Apple supported it longer than the Windows did in ways. Yeah, but anyway, getting off topic. Really neat system. Really hope you enjoyed today's kind of slow video. I'm sure it wasn't super fast, but it was a fun video. And it took me 2 weeks to get everything on here and get it all working properly. That's the reason why it's also running older installs that haven't been fully updated, because, well, the updates came out after I finished getting the thing going and I had other videos I had to film. So I will eventually update the other installs on this, get it completely up to date for everything. But yeah, I really enjoyed doing this. I enjoy this system. I enjoy playing with the system so much because it's so it's really good at what it does, and that's being able to run everything. It may not run it the best compared to a newer Mac, but it will still do what a newer Mac can do for most things. Video rendering I wouldn't do. That would suck on it. A few other things I wouldn't do on it just because how old it is. But as a daily driver, you could still use this as a daily driver. And depending on what OS you're running on it, it would run it very well or it would run it really poorly. And if it had an SSD in it, that would fix a lot of things. So that's a future upgrade. Although I'm still thinking we should just build a 24-inch and finally retire this thing. But it's not the end of the videos for this thing. It's just for this specific system. I do still have two other 20-inch systems, aluminum 20-inch systems that are 2.6 gigahertz that I want to do some comparisons with this with. Yeah, I've got the mid 2007 all the way through the early 2009 models in 20-inch 2.6. And I want to do a comparison video eventually on them all and show the performance differences and stuff. They didn't change a whole lot on the outside, and the first two models didn't really change a whole lot on the inside, but the third model really did. So it's not the last you've seen of this thing, but it's probably the last time we're really going through all the OSs unless there's another OS that it supports. Because that would be cool, but I'm getting this feeling that Sequoia is going to be the last Intel OS. So we'll see. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. And don't forget, I do have a Patreon and memberships. You know the drill on how to do that. Please subscribe if you haven't, especially if you enjoyed this video. Give me a like, whatever. And yeah, that's the end of today's video. This has been a Hrutkay Mods video. Here again I am with the... Here once again I'm with the... Here I am once again with the Swiss Army mic and Here I am once again with the Swiss Army Mac of mics. Here I am once again with the Swiss Army knife of math. Here I am once again with the Swiss Army knife of... Here I am once again with the Swiss Army knife of... Oh boy, it's scorpion. Oh, video. Here I am once again with the Swiss Army knife of Max, the mid 2017. It's a 20... Yeah. Here I am again with the Swiss Army knife of Max. Whoa. Here I am again with the Swiss Army Max. Here I am with the Swiss Army. Here I am again with the Swiss Army Mac of knives. Mac of knives. Yeah. Here again am I. Here I am again with the Swiss Army knife of Max.